You've seen them, right? The motivational videos, the guy screaming at you through your phone at 5 in the morning. Get up, grind, discipline equals freedom. And there's always some footage of a Navy SEAL doing push-ups in the rain, or some entrepreneur who hasn't slept in 3 days talking about how pain is the currency of success. And look, I get it. It sounds good. It sounds noble. The warrior, the ascetic, the person who can bend their own nature through sheer force of will. You imagine yourself as this unstoppable machine. You wake up at 4 a.m. You do the things you hate. You push through the resistance. You become disciplined. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you. That model is designed to fail. Not because you're weak, not because you lack character, but because it violates something much deeper than your psychology. It violates physics. You are not a machine. You are a biological system. And biological systems don't run on inspiration posters. They run on energy gradients, on reward circuits, on the path of least resistance. When you try to force yourself to do something that your entire nervous system is screaming against, you're not building discipline. You're building friction. You're creating heat. And heat is wasted energy. Willpower is a battery. That's not a metaphor. Studies show it depletes. You use it to resist the donut at breakfast, and by evening, you're 3 episodes deep into a show you don't even like. Eating ice cream from the container, the battery died, and the cruel joke is that we've built an entire culture around pretending the battery doesn't exist. We call people who run out of charge lazy. We call sustainable behavior undisciplined. Let me tell you what discipline actually is. Discipline is what you call it when someone else is doing something hard. When you're doing it, when you're in the flow, you don't feel disciplined. You feel pulled. You feel curious. You feel like you can't stop. That's not willpower. That's something else entirely. Now let me tell you about one of the most beautiful things in all of physics. It's called the principle of least action. And once you understand it, you'll never think about effort the same way again. Imagine a beam of light traveling from air into water. It bends. You learned this in school. Refraction. But did anyone tell you why it bends? Not the mechanism, the why, the reason. Here's the answer that will blow your mind. Light takes the path that takes the least time, not the shortest distance, the fastest route. When light hits water, it slows down. So if it kept going straight, it would spend too much time in the slow medium. Instead, it bends. It spends less distance in the air and more distance in the water. But the total time is minimized. The light doesn't decide this. It doesn't try. It just naturally finds the groove, the path of least action. This isn't some special property of light. This is everything. A ball doesn't fall because it wants to reach the ground. It falls because that's the path where the action, the integral of kinetic minus potential energy over time, is minimized. Nature is lazy. Nature is efficient. Nature never, ever wastes energy fighting itself. You know what happens when you try to make water flow uphill? It doesn't work. You can push it, you can pump it, but the moment you stop applying force, it flows back down. Because down is the natural gradient. Down is the path of least action. And you, my friend, you are not exempt from this law. You are made of the same stuff as the water and the light and the falling ball. When you're forcing yourself to do something, when it takes every ounce of willpower just to start, just to continue, just to not quit, you are trying to make water flow uphill. You are creating a system that requires constant external energy. And the moment you get tired, the moment life gets hard, the moment the pump stops, everything flows back to the natural state. The productivity gurus don't tell you this. They tell you to fight harder, to push more, to override your nature with discipline. But they're not teaching physics. They're teaching religion. And their religion is suffering. Let me tell you a story. Los Alamos, 1943. The Manhattan Project? The biggest collection of genius minds ever assembled in one place. Oppenheimer, Fermi, Bethe, Teller. Everyone working around the clock on the problem of how to split the atom and end the war. And then there's me, 20-something kid from New York. And you know what I'm doing while everyone else is stressing about uranium cross-sections and implosion dynamics? I'm picking locks, not because I was told to, not because it was part of my job, but because I couldn't stop. I'd be walking past an office, see a filing cabinet, and think, I wonder if I could get into that. It was a game, a puzzle. Could I figure out the combination? Could I do it faster than last time? Could I leave a note inside just to mess with people? I got good at it. Really good. I could crack most of the safes on the base. And people would ask me, Feynman, how do you have the discipline to practice lockpicking when we're trying to build a bomb? And I'd look at them like they were crazy. Discipline? I didn't need discipline. I needed restraint. I needed discipline to stop picking locks and go back to work. You see the difference? When you're actually fascinated by something, when it pulls at you, when you think about it in the shower and dream about it at night, you don't need willpower. You need the opposite. You need someone to drag you away from it. That's how I learned physics, not by forcing myself to study, but by not being able to put down the problem. I'd be at a party, and someone would mention something about rotating liquid, and I'd disappear for 3 hours working out the equations on a napkin. Was that discipline, or was that just following the itch? The things you're actually good at, the things where you develop real mastery, they don't feel like work. They feel like play. They feel like you're getting away with something. When I was working on quantum electrodynamics, reformulating the whole thing with path integrals, I wasn't grinding. I wasn't disciplined. I was having the time of my life. I was playing with nature, and nature was playing back. Now, compare that to the stuff you're trying to force yourself to do. The morning routine you hate. The business you don't care about, but think you should. The content you're creating that bores you to make. You need an alarm clock. You need motivational videos. You need to remind yourself why you're doing it. That's not the path of least action. That's friction. That's heat. That's wasted energy. Let's talk about this grind culture thing. This idea that if you're not suffering, you're not working hard enough. That waking up at 4 a.m. to do things you hate is somehow virtuous. It's not. It's stupid. And I can prove it with thermodynamics. When you push against your own nature, when you force yourself into a pattern that doesn't fit, you create friction. And friction generates heat. Heat is energy that's not doing useful work. It's waste. In a machine, we try to minimize friction because it makes the machine less efficient. But somehow, when it comes to human behavior, we've decided that friction is good. That suffering is the point. You force it, you push, you struggle, and nature pushes back. Your body fights you, your mind fights you. You need coffee to wake up, you need willpower to start, you need discipline to continue, and at the end of the day, you're exhausted. Not the good kind of exhausted, where you worked hard on something fascinating and time disappeared. The bad kind, the friction kind, the kind where you burned energy just fighting yourself. And then what happens? You burn out, you quit, you relapse, you fall back into the pattern you were trying to escape, and everyone says, see, you weren't disciplined enough, you need to try harder next time. But that's not the problem. The problem is, you were fighting physics. Look at the water. When water flows downhill, it doesn't tire. It doesn't burn out. It doesn't need motivational speeches. It just flows. Continuously. Effortlessly. Because it's following the natural gradient. That's what sustainable work looks like. Not the absence of effort, but the absence of friction. The people you admire, the ones who seem to have infinite energy, infinite output, They're not more disciplined than you. They're not tougher. They found their downhill. They found the thing where the work doesn't feel like work, where the action is minimized, where they're moving with nature instead of against it. So if willpower doesn't work, what does? If you can't force yourself, how do you get anything done? You don't push the water, you dig a ditch. This is the secret that engineers understand, but motivational speakers don't. You don't change behavior by willpower, you change it by structure, by architecture, by making the thing you want to do the easiest thing to do. Let me give you an example. Say you want to write every day. The disciplined approach is to wake up, stare at the blank page, and force words out through sheer grit. And maybe that works for a day, maybe a week, but then life happens. You're tired, you're stressed, the battery runs out, you skip a day, then two, then you're not a writer anymore. The structural approach is different. You don't rely on willpower. You remove the friction, you put the laptop on the kitchen table the night before, you disconnect the internet, you make coffee automatic, you commit to writing one sentence, just one, because starting is the hard part. Once you start, once the water starts flowing, it wants to keep flowing. You're not being disciplined, you're being lazy. You're making it harder to not write than to write. You're following the path of least action. This works for everything. You don't force yourself to eat healthy. You structure your environment so the healthy food is easier to grab than the junk. You don't force yourself to exercise. You find the movement that doesn't feel like exercise, the game, the dance, the thing you do, even if it didn't burn calories. The gym rats will tell you that you need discipline to work out. But watch a kid at a playground. They're running, climbing, swinging for hours. Do they need discipline? No. They're playing. The movement is the reward. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, we forgot this. We turn movement into punishment, into something we do because we should, not because we want to, and the same goes for learning, for work, for everything. When you're forcing it, you're doing it wrong. Not morally wrong, physically wrong. You're creating a system that requires constant energy input to maintain, and those systems always collapse. You want to know what I did after I won the Nobel Prize? After I solved the problems that made me famous? I got depressed, not because I wasn't successful, but because I realized I was doing physics for the wrong reasons, for the recognition, for the prizes, for the career. And when you're doing something for external reasons, even if you're good at it, it feels like pushing water uphill. There's friction, there's heat, there's waste. So I made a decision. I was going to only work on things that were fun. That's it. No more worrying about whether it was important. No more trying to solve big problems because they were big. Just, is this interesting? Does this make me curious? If not, I'm out. And you know what happened? I started playing with wobbling plates in the cafeteria, watching them spin, working out the equations for the wobble versus the spin. Totally useless, no application, just fun. And that led to thinking about electron orbits. And that led to quantum electrodynamics. And that led to Stockholm. But I wasn't trying to get to Stockholm. I was playing. I was following the fascination. I was on the path of least action. This is what they don't tell you about success. The people at the top, the ones who actually change things, they're not the ones grinding the hardest. They're the ones who found the problem they can't stop thinking about. The question that wakes them up at night, not because they should care about it, but because they can't help it. I also played bongo drums, for years, not professionally, just for fun. People would ask, why do you waste time on that? You're a physicist. And I'd think, why do you waste time on things you don't enjoy? Life is short. Consciousness is temporary. If you're spending it forcing yourself through a routine you hate, you're not being disciplined. You're being stupid. So here's what I want you to do. Stop trying to be disciplined. Stop trying to force yourself into someone else's definition of success. Stop watching videos about people who wake up at 4 a.m. to do push-ups in the cold. Instead, pay attention. What makes you forget to eat? What do you do when no one's watching? What problem do you think about in the shower? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail, couldn't get famous, couldn't make money from it? That's your path of least action. That's where the energy flows naturally. That's where you don't need willpower, because the work pulls you in. Maybe it's not prestigious. Maybe it's not what your parents wanted. Maybe it's weird. Good. Weird means it's actually yours. Weird means you're not following someone else's gradient. And yes, there will be hard parts. Of course there will. But there's a difference between hard because it's challenging and hard because it's wrong. Climbing a mountain is hard. Walking into a wall is hard. One is the path of least action toward the top. The other is just friction. When you find the thing that's yours, the hard parts don't feel like suffering. They feel like puzzles, like locks to pick, like problems to solve. You don't need discipline to work on them. You need someone to tell you to go to bed. The universe doesn't waste energy. Nature flows. Light bends to save time. Water runs downhill. And you beautiful temporary arrangement of atoms, you should flow too. Not because it's easy, but because it's efficient. Because it's real. Because it's the only way to do work that lasts without burning yourself out in the process. Don't let them tell you that suffering is virtue. Don't let them convince you that friction means you're working hard. Friction means you're in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing, fighting the wrong fight. Find your downhill. Find the thing that pulls instead of pushes. Find the path where action is minimized and outcome is maximized. That's not laziness. That's physics. That's wisdom. That's how you actually get somewhere instead of just getting tired. You want one more proof? Look at the people who changed the world, not the ones who talked about changing it, the ones who did. Einstein didn't grind his way through general relativity. He played thought experiments. He imagined riding a beam of light. He followed his curiosity about why moving clocks tick slower. Was he disciplined, or was he fascinated? Darwin didn't force himself to study barnacles for 8 years. He was obsessed. He couldn't stop. He saw patterns everywhere. In pigeons, in finches, in every living thing. That's not willpower. That's passion. That's the itch. Marie Curie worked with radioactive materials that eventually killed her. Did she need discipline to go into the lab? No. She needed discipline to leave. The work was the reward. The discovery was the pull. You see the pattern? The people who do extraordinary work aren't the ones with the most discipline. They're the ones who found the problem they can't put down, the question they can't stop asking, the game they can't stop playing. And here's the beautiful part. Once you find that thing, once you're on your path of least action, you don't compete with the grinders. You don't compete with anyone. Because you're not running the same race. They're pushing water uphill with motivation and caffeine and alarm clocks. You're flowing downhill with momentum and curiosity and joy. Who do you think gets there first? Who do you think lasts longer? Who do you think does better work? The answer is obvious. It's physics. It's always been physics.